Okay, well, thank you very much. As you know, I'm Piers Corbyn, and I run a company called WeatherAction.com, which does long-range weather forecasting, which is better than anything else in the world for more than 3 months ahead. And we do Britain and Ireland, Europe, and the United States. We've got loads of leaflets here. Please take, everything must go. And also, we're looking forward to donations for all sorts of costs involving the election that I've just been in, which, as you know, we changed the discussion there to make the ULEZ issue, which of course hides behind the climate change nonsense, make that a big issue. So now there's a conflict in all the political parties. And although I was going to talk about this later, I'll mention it now, because very interesting, that court case, I expected the judge was going to let Sadiq Khan off the hook and say, okay, postpone. But he didn't. He's told Sadiq Khan, go ahead. So there's going to be a massive split in the Labour Party about Starmer says, no, we don't want to lose votes. And Sadiq Khan thinks, well, he's got a divine right. Oh, that's fallen down. Okay. And of course, there's a split in the Tories anyway. So we've got to use this and drive in on the climate issue now, because that is the backdrop of lies to justify almost everything, including, carbon credit apps, everything. It's all about control. Okay, so now we're going to pass around a bit of paper at some point as well. In fact, if someone could draw up a piece of paper, I've got a piece of paper. People who want to be kept in touch about campaigning, can I give a blank sheet of paper to somebody? Yes, put name, address on there to join in campaigning to break the carbon con. All right, so thank you. Right, where we are now is the biggest lie campaign on climate ever, absolutely ever. What we see is these claims of superheat over Mediterranean. Well, a friend of mine on Ibiza phoned, he said, Piers, there's nothing special going on here. It's a hot day, but we have these quite often. What they've done is they've used measurements on the surface, never done before, and announced those as if they're air temperatures. So it's like measuring the tarmac out there and saying that is an air temperature. It is complete lies, and the BBC, of course, don't tell you that. Second thing they're doing is they're lighting the fires themselves. These arsonists are lighting fires. They've been filmed doing so, and the fire departments have said so. They're lighting fires. The whole thing is arranged to brainwash people into submission. And of course, all these things coincide with Greta Thunberg appearing somewhere. And we did indeed. She did appear with fires beforehand. And we had a bit of fun outside the festival hall with a placard saying Greta lied and people died. Because they did die on the Dartford crossing, because the roads were blocked there, ambulances couldn't get through, and the police said people died as a consequence. And we had a two leaflet demand, so please take some. It was arrest Greta Thunberg and arrest Sadiq Khan, because people have also died because of Sadiq Khan's policies. He's extension of the ultra-low emission zone to the first of all, to the North and South Circular, caused businesses to go bust because they had to sell their cars, and numbers of businessmen committed suicide. Now look, they don't care. And let us be clear, although Sadiq Khan in his book, which mentions me, by the way, not in any good terms, but it mentions me, and his book is about saving the planet from climate, and ULEZ there is put down as that. However, to sell it to the public, it's about pollution and saving your life immediately. Now, that is a complete pack of lies, and I want you to understand it. And our intervention in the by-election of Uxbridge and South Ruislip concentrated on this and really got the message across, which is why we've now got total confusion. And by the way, people who say, Piers, but you didn't get many votes, why start? No, we don't care about the votes. We stood to get a message across. And a lot of people heard what we said, shit, we've got to say no to this Labour Party ULEZ machine, even though the Tories have been doing it too, but, you know, no to that, and therefore vote for the Tory to keep out this Labour onslaught. Now, I'm for going against all of them, but it doesn't matter how many votes we got the message across and people understood. Now, to understand the message, let's be clear. The pollution levels of microparticles on the tube is between 10 and 100 times, typically 40 times more than if you stand by the Old Kent Road or Hyde Park or anywhere, right? So it's 40 times more polluted on the tube than on the roads. Well, why isn't Sadiq Khan then campaigning about the pollution on the tube? He's not at all. He doesn't care a damn about your pollution. His measures are not to control pollution, they're to control you and rob you. Let's be clear, that is absolutely the case. You should give a quick round of applause to that, so you understood. Okay, so we carry on relentlessly with the ultra-low emission zone thing as well. But more about that later, because I want to have time to talk about this issue of man-made climate change, what it is all about or not. First thing to understand, and this presentation will be available, a renewed presentation that took me 10 hours to put together, and one sleepless night as well. But it will be available online, and you will like it when you see it. The first thing to understand is this graph here, where you see the red one is temperature and the green one is CO2. And the green one follow changes in the red one. So changes in carbon dioxide level follow changes in temperature. And that is 20,000 years of data, and if you go back 1 million years, it's the same thing. So CO2 is not driving temperature. That is a lie and a complete false claim. And the so-called physics behind their claims are also fake. Now, when you go to Imperial College and raise this stuff, because I did, they say, oh yes, Piers, that's all true, because they can't deny the facts. But they say that extra CO2 at the end of whatever will cause extra temperature. All right? Well, let's have a look. Here's the end of these rises. There's the extra CO2, and there's no hump, no rise in that piece of temperature at the end. It's all nonsense. So when that answer was given in a meeting, she straight away hurried on to something else. That was the former head of department, by the way, who then went on to be head of the environmental lies campaign in Imperial. Right, a few other things on this graph, which is in the presentation, is that, well, they are changing temperatures all the time. It's not just that they're lying now about temperatures just by using wrong measurements. They systematically, for decades, have been changing the data. I'll repeat that. They systematically, for decades, change the official data. And I was with one of my assistants some time ago. It was about 5 years ago now. And we got a new data set from the University of East Anglia. And she looked at it and said, Piers, it's different. I said, what do you mean it's different? It's the same data. She said, no, it's different. They change the data. Let's be clear. And they admit it. You can go online and you can find the data set issued X for a certain period, a data set issued later for the same period with different data. And you can even draw graphs of them. And that's what we've done here. And that is on this graph. And I'll hold it up. Someone was to help me hold this up. Why not? Do you want to help hold it up? Then, but there's a black one in there, and that shows the temperature rise they put from the back here to there, that date here. That's the temperature rise on the black one, which was issued in 2000 or something, right? And then there's a red one, which they issued for the same data set, same time, same world temperatures, supposedly, but the range was this. Another range. So they make it colder in the past and warmer in the present. Every modification they do does that. It is lies, lies, lies. And you should applaud that as well. So they need to be called to task for this. When they ask, why do they modify? Oh, it's an adjustment, just an adjustment, a technical adjustment, you know. It's to con you. Basically, they make everything want to go up to tell you. And a bigger fraud, of course, or the major fraud preceded that, namely, you have this data here, which was the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, used to accept this, and it was Hubert Lamb's graph, who was head of the Climate Research Unit of East Anglia, and he wrote to me about 2 years before he died. I don't think he was anticipating his death, but he said, Piers, you've got to keep it on. They've taken over my department and put in CO2 nonsense when he knew solar activity was the key thing, right? And here's his graph that was accepted by IPCC then of the medieval warm period here, and then we're in a later period here. So we are cooler now than the medieval warm period. So they had a meeting, as you probably know, in about 1998 or so, University of East Anglia, a lot of emails, this was ClimateGate, and they talked about hiding the decline, which was a decline of temperatures after this, the medieval warm period, to make it cooler now. So they wanted to hide that and sort of flatten the medieval warm period, which they did, and they produced this graph, which is fraud. And it was proved it was fraud in a court case in Canada, where Tim Ball took, well, there was two of them. One person took another to court. Let's get this right. Tim Ball, here we are. Tim Ball took Michael Mann to court. No, Michael Mann took Tim Ball to court for fraud because Tim Ball, who funnily enough went to the same primary school as me, but was 7 years older, which is really weird anyway. He was taken to court for saying that Michael Mann should be in the state Penn, not in Penn State University, for his data fraud. And the judge actually said it wasn't fraud. It wasn't libel. So, you know, the judge, because Tim Ball couldn't produce proof of his graph. Basically, his graph was made up. That's what appeared in court. So this stuff is fraud, and this is the truth. So please understand that. And I thank this guy for his holding up. Quick round of applause. Thank you. We'll come back to that later. Okay. So what is really going on now is the world is cooling. And there's two things to know. One is details, and second is where's it going. The world is cooling as shown by, for example, increase in ice levels every year in the northern hemisphere and in the southern hemisphere. However, they hide and obscure the data all the time, and the BBC shows you a picture of ice melting and saying this ice is 4,000 years old. Well, you're meant to believe then it's colder, it's warmer now than for 4,000 years. No, ice that melts on the Greenland is always 4,000 years old because it just flows very slowly and melts. It's like seeing a tree blow down. That tree's 100 years old. That proves it's the biggest gale for 100 years. No, it's an old tree, right? So they will trick you all they can. So the actual data shows that the world is cooling, and we predicted back in 2008 in a conference in New York that we're going to see a more wild jet stream generally cooling, and it will reach coldest around 2035, a little ice age, which, funnily enough, Boris Johnson accepted was probably true. And I had many conversations with him on the phone about this because he was preparing to have a debate with Cameron, I think, on the issue, which never happened. So Boris knew it was all a pack of lies, but when he became Prime Minister, he repeated the nonsense. Look, the sun's gone in. It might be waiting for us now, but anyway, shall we just press on? Yes. So what is going to happen next? Well, you might be not aware that when they have a hot spell, they talk about it. When they have a cold spell, they don't. But the lowest temperatures ever recorded in the Northern Hemisphere were recorded this January in Russia. And there was also super cold records in America, Northern Hemisphere stuff, and Southern Hemisphere too, I dare say. But those things were not advertised, and these things do happen. We have had some hot summers too, and one of these leaflets mentions one of these. In fact, it's here, which are part of a 19-year cycle of lunar modulations. 2003, 1984, 2003 and 2022 were all blasts of very hot weather in the summer, which is a 19-year signal from lunar modulation of solar activity affecting the jet stream. Okay, but the thing you want to know now is, before we go into solar activity, is what's likely to happen in the next few years, because we've now in the situation of positive feedback cooling. The extent of the ice cap in the Northern Hemisphere and snow cover every winter and early spring is getting bigger. Now that means that the reflectivity of the Northern Hemisphere goes up. So the amount of heat coming into the Earth then goes down, and it means the summers that follow are going to be more lousy, such as this one. Despite the June, this has been a pretty lousy summer, I think you'll agree. And it'll be more lousy summers, and then the next winter will be generally colder on average, apart from other things. So we're generally in this downward curve, and it will start happening quite quickly. By 2035, it will be very cold, and you know, they'll tell you some lies. They'll say, oh, our plan is working or something, right? Yes. If you've got your app on, they'll tell you it's working. But within this period, there will be hot spells, because our theory says that during periods of, on average, low solar activity, and that's where we are now, on average low solar activity, the jet stream, that's the division between the upper air, the air to the north of temperate zones and the air to the south, that division called the jet stream becomes more wavy. Now, the reason for that is about magnetic effects from the sun, which we could discuss in a question if there's time. But that becomes more wavy, and that makes more extreme. So you will get these sudden short hot spells, and in general you'll get more cold spells. And in the past even, these big wavinesses have caused even the Nile to freeze. Imagine that, the Nile freezing. That has happened. And, you know, it could be very warm even on the North Pole for a short time. But generally speaking, the jet stream also shifts further south, and it gets generally colder. So that is what's going to happen. And last time this was happening big time was during the what's called the Maunder minimum of solar activity, which was when was in the middle of that King Charles I's head was chopped off. So we're moving to another of these minimums. So I'd let you know, just a coincidence, of course. Quick round of applause. And King Charles I had his head chopped off for treason, which is interesting because, of course, we have the World Economic Forum being, worshipped by our Charles. And he should be held to account for that. You should applaud that, by the way. It wasn't me saying it, officer, it was the people. It was the people. Okay, so anyway, what was I going to say? About what happened in 1666, right? These big changes. 1666, the fire of London. That was preceded by a thing called the Belgian wind, because everything bad comes from Belgium, you know that. And it parched London, and then probably it's the insurance companies thought, well, this is an opportunity, and they lit some fires. I think that's what happened, but anyway. That was the summer of 1666. But the winter that followed was hyper cold. the Thames froze over big time, right? And you know, of course, the Thames would have frozen over in 1963, but for the fact it's sort of now, it's not a swamp anymore like it was then. But that is the point. It was big contrast then in the middle of a generally cold period called the Little Ice Age. Okay, so now, how are we doing for time, by the way? I don't know. I'll just carry on until someone complains, perhaps. Okay. Okay. So how do we know that it's the sun that's doing these things? Well, I've described what happens, and there is another graph in the pamphlet, which you can't see, where it compares, it's probably in this. So those of you who've got this, let's have a look. I'll just see, it should be in here, I think. What I'm going to say is not in this graph, but the Maunder minimum period was a period of generally low solar activity. And now we're in a period of generally low solar activity. And that's when it's an ongoing period. They've got to last a long time. And that's why it's getting generally colder and the jet stream is getting wilder. That is a historical fact. And comparisons with data 10 magnetic cycles of the sun ago, that's 221 years, show that there's a similarity of average solar activity smoothed out every 221 years. But because of the averaging I mentioned, it also means that temperatures will follow that. And going back in time and comparing it, you can see that that means we are entering, logically, a cold period. And that is available, not in this graph, but it's available in various things. Okay, looking in the book, another thing to understand is, well, why you saw that the CO2 levels follow changes in temperature, but why doesn't it happen instantly, for example? Because the idea is, of course, the colder sea will absorb carbon dioxide and the warmer sea emits it. So if the sea warms up, which is world temperatures warming up because the sea is 70% of the globe, then you'll get more CO2. That is true, but what happens is that CO2 gets subducted by the melting cold water in Greenland, and it goes under the sea and comes out again about 500 or 800 years later. And there's a graph on this in this pamphlet on page 4 which explains that. So what we're seeing now, the rise of CO2 is an after effect of the medieval warm period. Okay. Right, pressing on. Yes. Right, the different theories of what they say. Now, there's two things they say, numbers of things they say, but you see, they have this blanket theory. They say, oh yes, CO2 acts like a blanket and keeps the earth warm. And they tell this to children and they think, well, that's true, I put a blanket on, I get warm, don't I? Actually, the blanket isn't warming you, you are warming the air. So it's not actually a blanket doing anything, but you know, they're telling you this. And it is a distortion. Now, this theory requires that heat up there's extra heat going to come from this extra CO2 up there, sent downwards, right? Okay. The children in school, that sounds good. Well, but you see, next thing is, well, what about the extra CO2 down here, sending heat up there? They don't tell you about that. Now, logically, that will make more heat go up than comes down because it's warmer here than up there. So straight away, when one sentence you can see there's something wrong with what they say. The other thing is, of course, that their theory requires heat to be moving from a cold body up there to a warm body down here, which is against the second law of thermodynamics, i.e. heat will not flow from a cold body to a warm body. If you believe that, you can save your electricity bill and just put a tea bag in a cold cup and sit it in front of you and will it to warm up. You know, wonderful. That is the level of their physics, right? Now, I'm serious. It is utter bullshit, and they know it. Now, I was invited to the Russian Academy of Sciences in 2004 because you'll like this story, the Met Office had invited themselves to go and see the Russians, to tell the Russians to sign the Kyoto Protocol, right? So we were invited, me and 4 others from around the world, were invited to be there to upset the Met Office. And Andrei Ilyanov, yeah, quick round of applause for that. I mean, it's beyond funny what happened. Andrei Ilyanov, who was Putin's chief scientific advisor and many other things advisor, phoned up the Met Office when they were at Heathrow Airport and said, oh, by the way, Piers Corbyn and Richard Lindzen and others are waiting to talk to you. And they were fuming on the phone, saying, well, we're not going to come then. But Andre, he said to us, but I knew they would. And sure enough, they turned up and they were really angry. And I said to Sir John Houghton, I showed a graph of solar activity and temperatures going together. And I said, it would be nice if one of these was actually CO2, wouldn't it? And he just sat there, said nothing at all. Now, he's normally not short of words, that guy, but anyway, there you are. So anyway, in the break, you see, I said to, now how did this happen? Yes, they broke up into groups and came and attacked each of us, these people from the Met Office, and said, Piers, you know, you shouldn't be with these people, you're better than that. Now, they said that to everybody of us, our group of 5, right? And I just said, well, I didn't answer that, I just said that's ridiculous. But I said, look here, what you're putting forward now is nonsense. This, they've got a fancy word for it, this dynamical equilibrium of photons at every level in the atmosphere, something like that. That's to justify what they say. I said, look, you know it's nonsense. It doesn't work. And this guy said to me, he said, well, Piers, that's what we teach in schools. I said, oh, but this is the Russian Academy of Sciences. And then he ran off. That was the end. I mean, it was utter nonsense. They know it's bollocks. But to end the story, that was 2004. What happened, the Russian Academy of Sciences then voted that man-made climate change story wasn't true and they should not sign the Kyoto Protocol. However, 4 months later, Putin is on television signing the Kyoto Protocol. So I phoned up the Russians. I said, hey guys, what's going on? You agreed, we agreed, the Russian Academy of Sciences agreed, everybody agreed, it's all bollocks. Why is Putin signing it? And he said, oh, Mr. Corbyn, Beslan. I said, what? He said, Beslan, Beslan, Beslan. I've got to go. And he went. So that was the conversation. Now, what was going on? Well, about a month after that, if you recall, the Russians were in Chechnya killing, and killing. Beslan was that school in Russia where there'd been a big security problem because the Chechens had taken over the school, right? And because of that, the Russians had decided to do something, and they, well, of course no one's told me this, but they obviously did a deal with the West. We'll sign the Kyoto Protocol if you'll give us a free hand in Chechnya. Unlike in Ukraine at present, where the NATO are causing the problems anyway. But just to sort of illustrate that politics does get mixed up with these things quite a lot. Right, anyway, so back to the CO2 theory. So their idea does not work. Now, if you ask them a bit more subtly, there's 2 other things they say. They say, well, if you go up in the atmosphere, it gets colder, right? So if there's more CO2, then the level in the atmosphere at the top where where infrared radiation escapes into space will go up higher. Because first thing to understand is they've got these radiation arrows. The radiation arrows show an infrared going from here to the sky or from the sky to here. Don't exist at all because infrared only goes up 25 meters and then it's absorbed. And then that next piece of air has to emit upwards, and it's not going to emit the same photons or anything. So the idea of that radiation up and down is nonsense. But so instead, they do have a more subtle theory which says, well, the upper level at which radiation can escape into space goes upwards, higher, and therefore the distance from there to the ground is bigger. And as you go downwards, it gets warmer. Therefore, it's going to be warmer on the ground because of the extra CO2, raising the radiation expulsion level at the upper levels. Fair enough. It sounds good. However, I pointed out that, yes, but you see, the CO2 up there, or water vapor, is also causing bigger fluctuations in temperature. And we're not dealing with a static system. We have daily fluctuations. And the fluctuations up there will then cause more radiation because it goes as the fourth power. Now, those of you who are still at school will understand this. The average of fourth powers, a range of fourth powers, is bigger than the fourth power of the average. Now, that sounds clever, doesn't it? But 1, 2, and 3 are three numbers, and 2 is the average of 1 and 3. 1 to the fourth plus 3 to the fourth is 1 plus 81, which is 82. Halve that, you get 41. 2 to the fourth is 16, right? 16 is less than 42, so 41, so you can understand what I'm saying. So the effect of CO2 in the upper atmosphere, extra CO2, will be to increase the radiation out into space and will cause a cooling. They said, no, their model shows going to be a warming. And they watched this thing for 10 years between 2000 to 2010. And on page 10, there's a graph, there's a map. If you can see that, and it is in the presentation, if you can see one of them, the one on this side, my side here, my right, your left, that shows their model. And the other one is the result. I don't know if you can see from there, frankly. It shows actually there was not a warm spot. What was observed was a cold spot, as I explained. So you should applaud that. Okay. So the point is, that was their sort of more advanced theory, right? But it doesn't work. Everything they say about CO2 is nonsense. Fake physics doesn't work. But I think for your sake of arguments, the thing to say in meetings is just two things. One, facts are carbon dioxide levels follow changes in temperature. Second thing is that if you want to get technical, say, look, it's a nonsense to say that heat is moving from a cold body to a warm body. It's all nonsense, and it's there to control us. What can we do to stop them? Well, the first thing is we want debate. We challenge them to debate. And there's a lot of fake opposition around, like, you know, GB News will not have debate on anything. They'll invite people like Together to not debate, but people who are taking action like me, no, 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 no. And in the past, I was invited regularly onto BBC and so forth to have debates. But now Russia Today's closed down and, you know, these debates don't happen. But demand debate all the same and try and get debates in the town halls. Look, the town halls are the actually implementers of New World tyranny. You think about it. They're carrying out all this zoning stuff, they're closing down shops, they're doing everything to control you. So you should set up action groups in every borough on accountability and challenging them to debate. And in Colchester and up in Salford, they have had some success in making the council kind of listen. And also in Romford, Havering Council, they sort of, well, they're clearly embarrassed because they've got nothing to say. And there might be people from Romford who want to say something in a minute anyway. Right, so action groups there, and then defying all their impositions, right? You see, we can have as many court cases as you like, but the judges say, oh, no, 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 they let people off the hook. See, I believe in the rule of law, but I don't believe in corrupt judges, so we've got a bit of a contradiction there. But we do need the rule of law run in an actually democratic and honest fashion. So the first thing is about that is to break their impositions. Now, the biggest one happening now was the ultra-low emission zone. Now, as you know, or most of you do know, that I have a car. A Vauxhall Cavalier, 1995. Quick round of applause for the car. And I ran up so-called fines of £61,000, which is the charge on the charge on the charge for not having paid a charge, and so it goes on, and that's for about 2 years. So, but the Citizens Advice Bureau rules say that when they take away something, one is they've got to take away something from you which is commensurate with the value of what they're trying to get. Well, there's no way my car's worth £61,000. But anyway, they took the car. They didn't do it properly. They didn't tell me they were taking it. They kind of warned, but they didn't, because I would have sat in the car if they'd come, you see. They took the car, and then they eventually tried to auction it without telling me, but we found that out, and then they had to withdraw that, and they took the car all over the country at tens of thousands of pounds expenditure, and eventually sent it to Leominster in Herefordshire, which is a long way away, and I won't go into the long story of how I got there just in time to join the auction. I put up my hand and I bought the car back for £850, which is small change out of 61,000, right? Imagine Oxford Street, 98% reduction, everything must go. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Anyway, they've technically used up their warrant of control. You see, they've used that, that's gone. So their attempt to get 61,000 has got them 850 quid. Well, that's okay. So I carry on. But the answer now is everyone who's got an older car must drive at will, do not pay, go into the zones. They will mount up bits of paper. Just go there. Drive at will, do not pay, and also demand the cameras be taken down. Drive at will, do not pay, take down the cameras. Right.